If you have an S corporation, you know that you need to be taking a reasonable compensation. Now, it could be too high or too low, both have implications. Of course, if you pay yourself too little, then you risk IRS scrutiny, which could then lead to back taxes, penalties, interest. But one of the other things that's not often talked about with having too low of a reasonable compensation is that sometimes that can hurt your QBI deduction. To put it simply, your QBI deduction can be limited based on the W-2 wages that you pay. So if your S Corp salary is too low, then you could be missing out on QBI. And then, of course, if your salary is too high, then you're creating unnecessary payroll taxes. So here's a common myth that we see on how to calculate reasonable compensation. There's a lot of people out there giving bad advice. I'm just trying to give you good advice. And it says here the one common misconception about reasonable compensation is that S corporations can use a 50-50 split, dividing profits equally between salary and distributions. So this is saying a lot of people out there are just taking general percentages and saying, oh yeah, I'll just take that as my reasonable compensation. But the fact is, reasonable compensation is dependent on the work that you're actually doing in the business. This here is an IRS fact sheet, and this is what the IRS agents actually use during audits. So it tells you right here, some factors considered by the courts in determining reasonable compensation. Your training and experience, your duties and responsibilities, so the work that you're actually doing in the business, your time and effort devoted to the business. That basically means how many hours are you working. Of course, if you're part-time or if you're full-time is going to have a big difference on your reasonable compensation. What comparable businesses pay for similar services? That's a big one. And that's a good way to think about it is what would you pay somebody else to do your job in your business? Compensation agreements and the use of a formula to determine compensation. So basically, if you do multiple jobs in a business, you have to use a formula to determine what your reasonable rate would be because not all jobs pay the same. And if you're a business owner, you know sometimes you wear multiple hats during a week. Sometimes you're a project manager, sometimes you're an admin, sometimes you're a salesperson. And of course, you're not going to pay an admin the same way that you would a salesperson. And this is where it starts to get complicated, and that's why we do reasonable compensation analysis. But if you like, then you can do this yourself as well. It's important to keep a log around what you're actually doing in the business week by week. Then you can look up market wage data on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics website. And then on that website, it's going to tell you how much a project manager in Houston would make, for example, or how much an admin in Houston would make. And then you apply that rate to the actual hours that you're working in the business. So if it's 20 hours as a project manager, 20 hours as an admin, then you would develop a formula in order to break those items out. Because if you're just applying general percentages or just guessing on your reasonable compensation, it can get very expensive. The IRS is cracking down very hard on this right now. Obviously, a lot of people are taking advantage of reasonable compensation. So you need to make sure that you have a number that you can actually defend.